Hi everyone, I'm Catherine Chen, Environment and Climate Lead at X. I'm excited to bring together today two good friends, Robbie Schingler and Wendy Tan White, for a fireside chat on Earth Day. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Wendy.
Hey, Catherine, thank you. I'm really delighted that Robbie could join us today. Robbie is the Chief Strategy Officer of Planet, also co-founder. Planet was started 10 years ago. In fact, Robbie, I believe it's your 10th birthday this year. Is that right?
This summer, yeah.
This summer. So it's really exciting. Planet operates the largest fleet of Earth imaging satellites in the world. And, their real mission is to use space to help life on Earth by, imaging the entire Earth every day and really making global change visible and really actionable. I'm also delighted to be a board member of Planet on behalf of Google. And I really wanted to deep dive with Robbie today, both the mission and impact that Planet has, also some of the exciting new initiatives that they've kicked off recently, but also really to deep dive a little bit about what it's really like to build really a moonshot, but not with an alphabet, what your experience has been like. So Robbie, welcome.
Thank you.
I'd love to kick off. Maybe what would be great is just maybe softball your question just to get you going
Sure.
today. Given your really big mission of Planet, why did you and Will really decide to kick off Planet? And what was really the drivers behind it? And how did that start?
Yeah, well, it is a softball question, but it could go back quite far. So Will and I, and our third co-founder, Chris, who's now a partner over at Data Collective, a VC firm who led our Series C, we were friends, collaborators at NASA, and beforehand. And we did see the convergence of technology, being physicists and building teams in technology at NASA. So I was there personally for about 10 years before starting Planet. And we actually first originally met around understanding the Earth from more of a space perspective, more of a planetary perspective. And we met at the UN about 20 years ago. And that was the kind of golden thread through a lot of our projects is seeing the natural progression of humanity as becoming multiplanetary, and to look at the history of the planet and the future of the planet through that lens of change over time, more of a 4D dimension of how the Earth as a system works, and also how humans work with the Earth as a system. After about 10 years at NASA, an organization that has done extraordinary things in space, you end up getting a bit calcified in some of the processes around how things are done. And so sometimes your crowning achievements end up becoming cultural anchors for holding an organization back. And so at NASA, it was all about managing risk. And that's not necessarily how people innovate and build new and novel things and capabilities. So some of it was we got trained at NASA, learned how to build teams, and really understand the complexity in systems engineering, tradecraft necessary of building such a sensing system for the planet, and also the right time. We saw that the cost of access to space was going down with secondary payloads. That if you look inside your phone, it was actually the Pixel, the Nexus 1, being an open source operating system. When you open that up, it's essentially 80% of the subsystems inside of a satellite. The fundamental question is, why do these things, cost so much? And what happens if you design from the very beginning an engineering process that wants you to build hundreds of these things and upgrade them every single year? And that was the impetus behind Planet. And then we took a look at all of the problems in the world around what could be solved from a distributed sensor network in space. And it was either internet for the planet or transparent planet. And we went with the transparent planet, and then came up with that mission to image the whole world every day to make global change visible, accessible, and actionable, as you mentioned. that was our founding mission, and it still is today, 10 years in, as we are actually looking for our next second decade. Because when it comes to making global change actionable, that's when it really is all about getting it into people's workflow. And it's not about the technology. It's actually more about the economics, the incentives, and how to shape markets.
Can you, just on that, can you tell us a little bit more like that? Because, you know, many of the folk here are building, you know, big vision moonshots, you know, things that may not impact for 10 years, if not 20. Yeah. Now you're at this 10 mark stage. When you look back, what were the key pivot points for you that, because I imagine, you know, you went out, you raised a lot of capital. Where did it start to get hard? What did you find the hardest pieces to do? And then how did you get through those to the point you are today?
Great question. I think we had enough satellites in space about 4 years ago to image the whole world every day. So it took about 6 years to get to it. And so that was a major pivot point, is when we had the content and the data. And we solved an extremely hard engineering challenge. But if you take a look at the second half of any sort of moonshot, is really the why and the impact that you want to have. That part is a pursuit of a continuous journey, right? And that's when you really do make the real world impact, and the world around you changed by the time you actually started building the thing and then finished building the thing. And also your team has changed. A team early on, when you're a handful of people or 25 people, in order to solve really, really hard engineering challenges is very different from the team that you have when you're operating a service, and you have 500-600 people. But I do think when it comes to systems change, which is what moonshots are all about, right? Doing something that you can't do by yourself, something that really kind of just changes the dynamic of a market, or of a societal challenge or wicked problem. It's a technology, as being a technologist, and as all the Xers are too, that is a differentiating ingredient, but it is insufficient to make the change that you're looking for. And that's when it comes into your users, your customers. That's when it comes into the regulatory environment. That's when it comes into recognizing how public sentiment shifts the regulatory environment, as well as large entrenched companies with their own view of the world. And that's why it is a continuous pursuit. And also, what you end up starting to build versus what you end up completing is not done. And so being able to be adaptable based on, as new technologies come up or new market opportunities, when you find the leverage point of how to best deploy your technology for change, is a continuous pursuit.
And just leading from that, it sounds like, did it take longer than you thought to actually get the base infrastructure up? Actually, that 6-year period, were you imagining it would happen quicker than that?
Absolutely. And in retrospect, I think that level of naivete is great, because it allows you to solve really, really hard systems engineering problems. And if you do it in a good architecture, then they are modules, and so then you keep solving each one of the components of the problem coming down. You end up with a really good resilient system. But yeah, our first satellite went up into space in about 2 years. And then we just kept iterating on the technology and capability in order to get to then an operational service level agreement. And that was the main business model thing that our insight that we had, was to build a non-rivalrous product, right? If you do a global monitoring capability, it's more work in order to commercialize that, because it required quite a bit of capital, and technology, but what you end up with is a unique business model that we thought was going to change Earth observation, which is a subscription. And rather than a one-to-one where you task one satellite for one customer, you actually end up doing a persistent monitoring capability And over time, we then built them for machines. So, for instance, one of the things that when we started a company 10 years ago, clearly we saw the commoditization of storage and compute happening, so we can suspend disbelief around the cost of storage and processing. But ML and AI and its revolution over the last 6 years was something that we definitely harnessed, then redesigned the upgrade of our satellites to be best used for that, right? So as you're actually doing your moonshot, it's important to, I think that it's important to have a prefigurative image of the future around what you're trying to impact, and then how you're going to do it with your technology, but then to do it in an intelligent way, to be adaptable when you get to a point where the technology is ready for usage by society. Because the way in which it gets used, especially if it is 10 years out, there will be a different landscape around you.
And post the pivot of getting up the infrastructure and how hard that, it's great that I think you took the time to get the technology moat actually in place. But 10 years on, you are commercial. Planet really does make money in revenues. You have a business model. How has that benefited you? So at some point, you and Will made a choice. If you're making the Earth transparent, you could have made it a not-for-profit business, but you chose to make it a profit business. Mm-hmm. When you think back now, and now you actually really have a business that's running and that's sustainable, are you glad you did it as a for-profit business as opposed to a not-for-profit? What are the pros?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a nonprofit business is still a business. There's still a business model. And I fundamentally believe that good organizations, purposive organizations, have a mission and their promise to their employees and their stakeholders at the core of some sort of theory of change, like why they're doing what they're doing. And then good businesses are ones that wrap their business model around that theory of change. So the greater you do in the market, the more that future becomes a reality. And it's never perfectly on. But that's where values internally and culture of an organization help you steer your path as you commercialize, but then also as you scale and as you take responsibility for the effect of your product on society. So I think that doing this as a business allowed for us to make it possible, because at that time that was the type of capital that was out there in order to build up the technology, was venture capital, taking technical risk in order to then shape and create new markets. And that's what VC classically is good for, and it hurts more companies than it actually helps. So it's not the only approach, of course. But I also fundamentally believe that you can do really, really good societal benefit, creating new utilities for our species that has a business model that is profitable and that is aligned with one's values. And so, for instance, for us, back to what I was saying before with coming up with the monitoring mission, is that was a purposive choice. We knew that we could disrupt aerospace, but we decided to come up with a mission that then that shaped our product. And so our product is something that we attribute to planetary ethics. Is actually a body of ethics where it has two principles with it, which is non-exclusive and equal access. And that ended up guiding then what we built and then how we sold our product into the market. So I'm a big fan of, especially as I get older, I guess, coming at this more from a physics perspective and from a space perspective. I worked on space telescopes looking out, not looking down before. And then looking down and seeing our planet, it's the socio-political challenges that we have that is now more worthy of devoting our time and attention to, because technology is not going to solve us. It's actually how we organize ourselves, how we make decisions as a global population, and also, but I think as technologists, there are things that we can do that find the right leverage point but it is something that does require multiple stakeholders in order to do systems change. So I think for-profit companies with aligned business models with their theory of change is how we shape markets, how we shape incentives, and how we shape and more affirmatively create a more sustainable global economy.
Can you share a little bit about how that really works with Planet, that balance between, so for example, you can give us an example of a service product you sell really now,
Sure.
But actually though, how you can also use that on the flip side to genuinely help the earth. How have you balanced those two things? I think we discussed it a little bit earlier, that you have different models even for the same sort of products, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can think of like our product as really a piece of software. And so the reason why subscription businesses are the most profitable businesses and have the highest margin is because it's near zero marginal cost in order to service another customer, right? And so you can think of Planet as its business model to be a SaaS-like business. It's powered by a whole bunch of unique proprietary content, but really the tools and to make it useful is what our core focus is in the verticals that we go after. But it also helps for science, it helps for civil society, it helps for disaster response, and so for the public benefit. So again, as a result, you can come up with a license that allows for you to commercialize and price your product that is your economic engine for your organization. And you can have a more restricted license for it to be used for more public benefit. So let me do an example. One is something that is called the Allen Coral Atlas. And so this is a piece of software that was built with Vulkan, and Vulkan is the family office of Paul Allen, late Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft. And Planet, Vulkan, and Arizona State University worked together to take the Planet data and turn it into a map of the world's corals. And that required a couple of years of doing real science and ground truth to then classify what you see from above in space down to about 10 meters below. And this required, scientists driving underwater spectrometers in order to then classify exactly at the same time, come up with that algorithm, and then come up with a dashboard. And so all of that is then powered by Planet's daily feed for all the coastal zones and coral reefs. And it has resulted in something where we got paid a little bit of money, but not nearly as much as we would if it was for profit activity, which then allowed for us to also work with the science team to make sure then that this data can be used for then that digital public good, which is really just a piece of software and a visualization of a higher order data product. So it's more like a level 4 data product rather than the raw content, which is what we own and can still commercialize for a variety of different ways. So that is one example of something that was a new site for the planet, the world's corals. We've never been able to map that before. And with these types of technologies, it's possible to do. And in fact, all of the data and the technology pieces were there. It was a matter of putting the partnership together in order to come up with that new public benefit, that new digital public good. And I think this latest example of a new satellite that we're building is also another next level example of that. Is to drive our product roadmap in such a way that at its core has a business model that allows for there to be a digital public good that comes out of it from the very beginning. Actually,
you're sort of referring now to CarbonMapper and the new hyperspectral satellites you're doing as well. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Can you tell us more about that? Because that was pretty exciting. I mean, that you only announced that very recently.
Yeah, we announced it last week. This is an awesome mission and partnership. So it's actually Greg Asner, since I mentioned him before, and I know that he's worked with X before. He's worked with the Google Geo team and Earth Engine. He is a world-renowned evolutionary biologist, and he's really a biodiversity expert. And for the last 20 years, he's been flying in a plane, an imaging spectrometer, or something that collects hyperspectral data. And he's been doing that for a long time, and has pioneered a number of approaches of combining that data with LiDAR data to get biomass and to really understand quite a bit of natural capital on the planet. And when we first met him 8 years ago, he's like, I want to put this thing into space. So that was his dream, and we're like, we're just trying to get a CubeSat into space, right? And so it like took over time, but we've done a number of projects together. But you know, we saw the urgency and the immediate opportunity to really take it seriously. So about a year and a half ago, we started what we call internally a phase 0 study, where we work with the technologists, in this case ourselves and JPL, work with science experts, in this case Arizona State University and University of Arizona. Work with policy experts. In this case, it was the California Air Resources Board, so the regulator of California. Rocky Mountain Institute, EDF also has been consulted in this, and philanthropists in order to look for a data feed that's on the Pareto frontier across the spatial, spectral, and temporal resolution and cost that allows for us to empirically monitor point source methane and CO2 emissions. And so that was the kind of like big goal that we were going for. But we also wanted it to be something that had a sustainable business model. So this comes into for-profit versus nonprofit. And what the team ended up doing was creating a brand new nonprofit. That's called CarbonMapper. You can go to carbonmapper.org to see that. It's run by Riley Duran, who was our partner all the way through this at University of Arizona and also a JPL fellow. And the nonprofit has put Planet on contract to build and deliver 2 satellites. And we deliver to them as our customer level 2 data products that then CarbonMapper turns into a level 4 data product for methane and CO2 emissions. And that is going to be open as a digital public good. There's a bit of a delay between when they are allowed to make that open. That then gives Planet, who owns all of the satellites and the content, the ability to commercialize in other domains. We also have done this in such a way where the data that is derived and built, or the data that is collected by Planet on this line of satellites, that there is a revenue share that goes back to CarbonMapper, so that we have aligned incentives for us to do well in the market with this, so that we can then build dozens of these satellites, monitor more places, and then open up new applications from the site that you get from 420 different channels, not just, you know, the 3 that we look at the world through.
Now that's a great potential hybrid business model, right? Where you can effectively, you know, help service public digital good effectively, but in the data that you're collecting there, the quid pro quo is you can actually use it to also create commercial products on top of that.
Correct.
I mean, I don't know if you can maybe give the audience a little bit of an example of maybe some of the commercial, using the same, let's say, hyperspectral imaging you're doing for CarbonMapper. Are there potential commercial applications of that there that you propose?
Absolutely. So CarbonMapper is it has many different channels, and if you actually see what you can pop out crop species, you can understand different types of materials, you can understand geology. This type of technology is really it senses molecules, so you can see it in the air, you can see emissions. But it also, and that same type of technology allows for you to then understand the phenotypes of different types of crop species. And so the applications are the same applications that we have today with our users. It's just much greater fidelity. So instead of really understand agricultural yields like a broad NDVI, you can go all the way down to the different type of crop. And that really is quite extraordinary, and more or less like the direction around where things are going with Earth observation. Is it's no one data set. It's actually all combined together. You know, the good thing about the monitoring mission that Planet has is that we've recorded history now for the last 4 years every day, and that is an unbelievable training data set. In a couple of years, when this data set comes down, and then we can go ahead and classify the same location, but with greater fidelity, you can go back and rerun that model, right? And so if we begin to actually think about the space segment as a virtual constellation, it's really just a sensor segment where you then need to make all the data interoperable with one another. It then goes through a platform into our customers and users. So, but this opens up new applications that we can't do today, such as, again, methane emissions, CO2 emissions, identifying leaks. Oil and gas operators, leaks to them is loss of product, so they're actually incented to fix it. But interestingly is, and part of the reason why we worked with the state of California on this is, if they know this improved data is coming, they can take a look at their regulations. They could actually begin to open up for greater regulations, and that process takes 4 or 5 years through the public commentary process. But it allows for them to trust that this organization is going to deliver this improved data, which might mean that they want to shift some of their public policy efforts and initiatives so that they can then incentivize the right type of behavior in the market. But yeah, no, the applications are in mainly in agriculture and in energy. And if you actually think of ag and energy, food and energy for the planet, that's tremendous amount of leverage when it comes to largest drivers of climate change, and also critical for how we have an aligned ecosystem with humans and nature together.
Fantastic. I was just going to give a 10-minute heads up to the audience. I'd love to open this up more to the audience questions in about 10 minutes time. So if you want to get any questions into the dory, we'll start to ask Robbie some of those questions live in about 10 minutes time. So Robbie, I mean, one thing to talk about that's quite exciting is, you know, there's a new fidelity of data you can bring in with hyperspectral, but, you know, there's a lot of data you already collect. And in a way, what you're starting to talk about is the fusing of these different sets of data to create these higher level products, higher order products. Could you imagine that you'll fuse other types of data into, other than satellite data, in the future?
Absolutely. And by we, it's not just Planet, it's our users in the ecosystem. When our users are able to use their own unique lens of the world and then classify it with this monitoring, this contextual information feed, that's when it actually gives them business value. So making Earth observation data joinable with more tabulated data is what then will really accelerate quite a bit of the sense-making applications that are driven by these empirical data feeds that then everybody has access to. So fusing of data is fundamental, and making it interoperable from the very beginning. And that's one of the benefits that Planet has, is having the whole tech stack. Is we can do some stuff on board the satellite that then really make it a lot easier for it downstream to be better joinable and usable. But I think that's where the Earth observation sector is today. It's still in a cottage industry. It's something that requires quite a bit of remote sensing science to better utilize, and we haven't hit the tipping point yet for when it gets to be utilized by a data scientist or a software developer really, really easily. We're the broader community is getting pretty close. We all see that. We've seen that for a decade, and it hasn't really quite taken off yet. But that combination between vector and raster data, from pictures to numbers in the location space, is like really fundamentally close. And that's where it gets to some of these higher order data products where you don't have pictures, you just have tabulated numbers that is trusted, is when really these data-driven sense-making contextual applications will take off.
And the I obviously some of the context I have is obviously a lot of the teams within X and even within Google itself, I think obviously are looking at different verticals within these potential data sets. I mean, if people want to partner with you, how typically have you kind of approached partnerships so far? You obviously have a partnership obviously with Google already.
Yeah, absolutely. So 4 years ago is when we did our first major strategic partnership with Google, I guess, is when Terabella joined Planet. That anniversary was actually just last week. And then we also entered into a data contract with Google. And I think as we're looking out for a number of the climate challenges that we have, and recognizing the data sets, the desires, and the technologies of our respective organization, there's a lot that we can do. So we're very much open for getting creative. And I would consider CarbonMapper a creative partnership that we did. It was something that was on our roadmap that was accelerated because there was a need for it, and it is a systems change project where we play our own unique role. And so if there are X projects out there that want to be creative around a new sensor in space, or how compute is done, whether on board or at a ground station or in the cloud or in the browser, absolutely. I think that there's quite a bit that we can do there. And we are a data subscription business and a platform business. We aren't going super vertically deep to come up with an application, and that's where we can actually partner together. So if there is a particular data-driven leverage change product that you have in a particular vertical that you want to go way further up the stack on, like in insurance or something like that, absolutely, that is something that we can get creative around making sure that we have aligned interests. We still will be open in building out what our business model is and where our intellectual property is and where that ends. But we're very much open for it, especially in our second decade as we look out for greater growth.
And on that, I'd love you to be able to just explain a little bit about your vision for, you've hit your 10-year anniversary coming up for Planet. What's the next 10 years for you? What are you hoping you're going to achieve in this next 10-year period?
Oh, Wendy, I'm really excited for the next decade, and I do see it as a little bit of an inflection point. When Will, Chris, and I started the company, we did it as a purpose-driven company, and we did founder super votes in order to make sure that we can commercialize within our values, and I think that has served us well in a bit of a stewardship role in the first decade. But I feel and see the business strategy and the urgent opportunity to accelerate more of this transparency and more of these tools to be out in society. And so we are looking for growth, and what that means for, but the mission behind it is to really help to retool the global economy. Honestly, that's what I feel we're up to, by providing a level of transparency that gets everyone on a common operating picture, where people trust the veracity of that data, so it's never questioned. So it can be used in a court of law, it can be used in actuarial tables, and these higher order data products can feed the global economy, can feed ESG standards, and can be used in internal decision-making tools for people to understand their supply chain, their risk, their competitive dynamic, et cetera. So to give that site of context to society is what I'm excited for, because I do think it will de-escalate conflict when people are on a common operating picture. We've seen that time and again. And it will allow for people to anticipate, understand the risk, and then mitigate it prior to then having more calamity. And as change around us is accelerating, these types of tools are going to be default and needed and necessary. So I'm that's what I'm excited for, is for us to really bring this to the web, to the enterprise, and to allow for people to really value. I mean, honestly, is to understand the externalities that we are having on the environment, and to put in the right type of incentives for whether it's regulatory or consumer pressure for companies to take greater responsibility for the effects of their activities on the global commons.
And do you think the world's ready for this? You know, I think we've just gone through, you talk about change, accelerating change. We've gone through probably one of the toughest years in certainly in our lifetimes, right? With COVID, with the massive political shifting. Do you think the world's ready for this? What makes you think they're gonna, there's people are questioning what veracity even is, right, at the moment. So
it's true.
Why do you think we're ready for this? Do you think we are?
I think the world is looking for belonging. I think there's something unique that actually comes from the overview effect, if you're familiar with that term.
You want to describe that just for the audience again?
Yeah, so I'm a space geek, so a lot of my frames come from that worldview and perspective, more of a planetary perspective. And there's a concept called the overview effect, which is when an astronaut goes up into space and they look down, they see the thin atmosphere and they don't see borders, right? It looks like an integrated system, it looks like home, and it gives them that context. And then when they land. And then they have the terrestrial perspective looking up and around, and our social structures that we have in place. It's more of an other, right? And so that has changed astronauts from their worldview going up into space, and that's called the overview effect. And so I think, honestly, Keyhole and Google Earth did that in the 2000s. It allowed for people to actually see our home planet from a new perspective that we couldn't before, and that has a huge societal impact on just our overall consciousness and state of the world and our role within it. I think what we have now is more dynamism, a dynamic nature of things, and the technology that allows for us to then get meaning out of lots of signal. So is the world ready for this level of truth and transparency? I think we used to rely on, at least in Western society, quite a bit on the fourth estate and media for sense making around the things that are important. And I think over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a challenge with that. Again, business models align with one's mission. And anytime you go off that, sometimes you end up, very good people are under tight constraints in order to do the best decisions that they can, but when they're off and misaligned, sometimes they get appropriated. And so I think we do need a common operating picture and a level of truth that technologically is trusted and is governed in such a way that is pretty overt around its mission and its reason for being. So yes, I do think the world is ready for it. I think the world needs it. More than anything, and that the technology is there, but it is a matter of getting it into people's workflow.
But who should own that veracity though? So is it, in truth, is it what do you see? Is it government? Why do you think it should be company? Who do you really trust to do that? It's funny, actually, I was having a debate with, it's funny, it was between a group of UK and US entrepreneurs and policy folk recently. And there's quite a fundamental split between whether people trusted government more or companies more.
Yeah. And I think not all companies are the same and not all governments are the same. So I think it is, when it comes to public benefit, we have in in many countries around the world, given that as the mission of the states. But if you see like a state, and which is a great book, by the way, if you look at the world through that lens, you see you're playing a different game. You're playing a power game, and you're doing public benefit at the same time, right? And it's an over-constrained a tight, over-constrained problem set that people can move and act on. So some of it is for governments. I think companies, good companies, if they have transparent processes, and they have the ability to and proven ability to make good business choices, which is recognizing not just short term but also public sentiment and one's brand promise. That with good governance, I think that you can earn that public trust. And if you get the public trust, then from a state standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, you are given more of the permission to operate, right? Of course. When you lose the public trust, then it makes it more difficult in order to have the regulatory license to operate, and that's really, really hard to claw out of. So. In short, I think it depends on the actor. It depends on one's incentive structure around what they're really trying to do. And I do think that more of these planetary utilities can be effectively governed by a for-profit company with good governance.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions for you from the audience. Robbie,
Mm-hmm.
are you happy to go through that? The first one was, global imaging seems like it would have a lot of geopolitical implications. How do you manage providing a tool that in many cases benefits society, but also might be exploited by malicious actors?
Great question. So we have an ethics committee internally. So I mentioned this earlier. I don't know who asked the question, but I mentioned this earlier where we have a mission at the core. And then we come up with our product principles that then constrains us around how we actually commercialize. So our product principles of non-exclusivity and equal access is something that is permeated through how we've constrained ourselves in order to innovate our products and business model in society. So that was done in such a way. So when we chose the spatial resolution, we did it so that it didn't get into too much of people's national security. In order for us to commercialize, and also in order for us to live up to that kind of product promise. But that being said, it's a tool, and so malicious actors can use that tool for their own ends. We have an ethics committee internally to Planet. I think we started one right around the time we met Greg Asner about 8 years ago, before we had a satellite in space, and we've adapted it about every 2 years. And ethics to us is really a predetermined decision making or process to go through when you have to act fast, and that has served us really quite well. They're there to look around the corner for the impact of this of the user by using our product. So they look at who the end user is, what they would actually do if they didn't get it. Like, would it cause more harm to not have them have access to it? And there have been, dozens of cases where, probably many more than that, because we never actually get to the point of engaging with some customers in the market, but dozens of cases where we've chosen to not move forward. But this is a continuous pursuit, and especially as we have 700 enterprise customers. We have many tens of thousands of education and research users, but not millions or tens of millions. And when it gets to that, those are different tools and processes in place in order to take responsibility for the effect of our product on society, which I think fundamentally we have to. And the best way to do that is what is the core product that you're doing and the business model associated with it. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good answer. The next question from the audience was, something like CarbonMapper was on my dream list of things needed, right? So that's great, good start, as a foundational tool for many climate solutions. So can you share more about the sort of cluster size, sensor resolution, satellite orbits, etc.?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any plans of differential pricing in the global south, for example?
Great. So the first one is This is this is an imaging spectrometer. So it goes from visible up to about 2.4, 2.5 microns. 420 bandwidths. It's 5 nanometers wide, all the way across the electromagnetic spectrum. So it hits methane emissions and CO2 emissions and a whole bunch else in between. So any satellite in space has to do with spatial resolution and temporal resolution, which is the number of satellites. Spatial resolution is really, kind of the size of your aperture, and your sensor characteristics, or your spectral resolution. So we chose the sensor and 30 meters per pixel. Actually 20 meters per pixel is what we ended up going with, 20 meters per pixel. Because that hits about 90% of the super emitters. And so there was a really good Pareto frontier of spatial and spectral resolution in order to get started. So the first 2 satellites is what we're funded for. That's going up. And the second satellite that we're building is a redesign of the JPL instrument that we're designing in-house, so that we can get the unit cost economics down and design it for manufacturability. And then the next phase is about 18 of those satellites. Right now, there's an animation on carbonmapper.org that shows that. They're in 3 different orbital planes, just off one another in inclination, but all sun sync. The unique thing, of course, that you get with Planet is we can build satellites really quickly, and we have a scalable operational system that allows for us to add more sensors into space, and it just goes into the mission operations and the data processing pipeline and into the product development in a scalable fashion. So we can launch to other inclinations. We can launch to different orbits if there is a need for that temporal update that you're looking for. So for those who are, orbital mechanics out there, it's actually really kind of fun with these small launch vehicles that are up there and these big launch vehicles that are becoming cheaper to come up with interesting concept of operations. That when you combine those 2 types of capabilities together, allows for you to come up with a temporal resolution that really could help a particular use case. And then the last one is differential pricing for Global South. Absolutely, that's core to our product today. Is we own the content, we license access to it, and we do value-based pricing. And just like if you're a DVD, right, there are 3 different zones around how much they cost on the planet. You could do similar types of stuff for our products.
Great. We suddenly had a late flurry of questions come in. We've got 10 minutes. So I was going to suggest maybe if we try and get through all of them. And
sure, I'll do it quicker.
Then we'll see where we can get to, because it's great. People are interested. So look, you've achieved some great outcomes through your mission and a really solid direction, which is impressive. But how are you able to get over the regulatory and policy hurdles in the US and internationally?
Yeah. So regulatory, if you, there aren't regulatory hurdles. Like if you understand the role that they are playing in order to, the role of the regulator in the government, then you just don't surprise them. You go to them early, you let them know what you're up to, you brief them early, establish the relationship, you understand their process, and then don't have them ever be critical path for your business. And so just match their speed and time. And so that's how we kind of got through that is, when we were still in the garage and I left NASA, I went to NOAA, which regulates commercial remote sensing. And I told them that, hey, we're going to launch 100 satellites. And they're like, okay, Robbie, we'll be back to NASA. Like, good luck. And every quarter we just gave them updates and we showed them our stuff. And we established a relationship before we actually put in an application that was unprecedented, which is a constellation. Now that's common knowledge, but at that point in time, that didn't happen. So earn trust, have empathy for them, don't have them be critical path for you.
Love it. Look, it's a great insight. I think too often people think of regulatory like it's combative in some form, and actually they're just people also trying to do the right things. So I think you're right. I think that's a brilliant insight. So how do your customers think about building their own businesses around Planet's data? Do they see this as a kind of added business risk? versus just building off publicly available free satellite data. Yeah, and so why are they paying you more than the sort of free, most available stuff that exists today?
Yeah, so first of all, the freely available satellite data is excellent, and it's used in our tech stack and in our products and in the ecosystem. And that's awesome. You can almost think about that as lead generation into people to recognize that they can use remote sensing technologies for them to make better decisions. So I think that's excellent. Why do people use planets imagery in our products? It's increased fidelity. So just like we were talking about the hyperspectral data, going from the doves today are only visible in near infrared with 8 bands. This goes all the way up in a shortwave infrared 420 bands. So greater fidelity allows for you to see different things at different rates. And that means business value to different customers, whether you are a commodity trader or whether you are a farmer or whether you are a regulator, for that matter. And so the core thing that Planet has that's really quite unique in the market is that we're at a level of human activity, daily update of the planet at 3 to 4 meters per pixel, and that really helps to understand quite a bit of information that is not possible with freely available data today.
Great. Another question. I love the fact that new hyperspectral satellites can fill a sort of missing gap in biodiversity data today. Yet, time and time again, society ignores the benefits of biodiversity. So how do you anticipate that these insights are going to be used and potentially monetized?
Sure. So I share the sentiment of the question, which is, and to do a bit of a reframe on it, most of the global discourse has been around climate change, but the real disaster of our time is biodiversity decimation, and it's happening like in our lifetime, and we can see it. And that is, and it's not ephemeral. It's not a number of degrees. It's actually the birds are changing in your neighborhoods, right? Like things are shifting quite a bit. So how do we actually allow for the public to recognize the role of biodiversity? I think that there are some really cool efforts that are happening. Peter Seligman started a new nonprofit called Neoterra that I really do like, and it's really all about stewardship and having communities take responsibility for their ecosystem around them. And if you take a look at the most biodiverse regions of the world that we still have left, 40% of them are under the guardianship of indigenous communities. And so it's not by society, it's not just Western society or whatever, but it's also how do we support that guardianship and that stewardship of indigenous communities to take in improved knowledge and data that we have, but then also leads to something that is fresh water and that does have clean air and that does feed a population and so forth. So this is a challenge actually of this decade. I don't have any answers for it. We're just a technologist and we have a new data feed that we think is going to be part of it. But I think that there will be many multi-stakeholder partnerships that are out there that can become data enabled in order for people to recognize the biodiversity needs. Now, how is it going to be monetized? By the time these guys go up, if we do our job correctly, it's just in the back end data feed that then have higher fidelity models and variables that then go into business intelligence tools. So it's just a new data source with all the other data sources that go in.
Great. And final 2 questions. I think it touched a little bit on what we talked about earlier around veracity and what people believe, but I mean, maybe we can go a bit more pointed. Basically, people are saying there's many approaches and beliefs in climate change around the globe. I mean, I think if we make that more blunt, some people are denying, right? There's still a denial that even climate change and global warming is happening. So how do you sell what you are measuring in truth? And I think we've already answered the question more around for-profit businesses helping create trust in your data, but how would you see that, just in the context of what I just said? How would you sell what you are measuring is the truth in a world which some believe and some don't?
Well, I think there's a technical solution to it. I think that there is an accessibility argument to it as well, and then a a virtuous cycle of credible organizations on the planet that then assign it as truth becomes more truth. But clearly, from a technical perspective, we've got to nail that. To cryptographically hash images on board prior to then it coming down, so forth. And we own and control the satellite. We build it all of ourselves. That is something that internally we have our own processes in order to have auditability and traceability that hasn't been hampered. So we believe we can get untampered facts of data. And then it's going to be data transformations on top of it, and having provenance through all the different models and all the different joinings of data that then come out to an indicator. And then how does that indicator show as truth? Frankly, that's one of the things that I'm excited about the experiment with CarbonMapper. That's their goal. Their goal is to deliver a methane and a CO2 indicator that is like the weather service for methane and CO2. And so, and that's where science comes in, peer-reviewed journals and papers. And then having there be, and maybe this is actually a role, maybe even for government or something that's more of a intergovernmental, is for there to be a body that audits one's technical processes, governance processes, and assigns a level of independent verification that is truth. But I think much of it is sentiment and actions, and to do that day to day to then earn up that trust from the general public.
Fantastic. And maybe last question, just to wrap us up. What would your dream product that you would hope would be built on top of your infrastructure and data? Like, what would your ultimate one be?
Well, one could be the hedge fund to end all hedge funds. So someone should work on that. One of the dream products for me, and this is not sexy, but I think it's critical, is really insurance. I think that our global economy is not reflecting of everything that we value as humans, and I would love for it to. So that's valuing nature a bit more, but then it's also not valuing the risk that we actually face together. And so being able to retool the economy to be in alignment with the incentives that we need to become planetary stewards is my dream through the course of this decade. And I think a lot of that comes into the insurance market. They're a late majority vertical market. They're not necessarily technology forward, but that's an awesome opportunity.
Robbie, I just wanted to really thank you. Thank you for really being so open with us and answering a lot of questions. I know we kind of asked a lot today, but I think it's really fitting for Earth Day that 10 years on, planet's genuinely having an impact on the world and will continue to do so. So thank you for coming in today.
No, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. And we are serious about being creative together around coming up with products of consequence in order to find leverage points that then shape the dynamics of markets. So if you want to partner, please get over me.
Fantastic. And thank you to Catherine as well for helping us organize the event. Thank you all. Thank you, X.
Great. Take care.
Enjoy it.
Happy Earth Day.